Hi again, welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded, the podcast from Sofeast. I'm Adrian. Renaud, our CEO, is with me as well, as he often is. Hi, Renaud.
Hey, hi everybody. This week, what are we talking about?
This week we are on episode 140, by the way, and we're talking about how to protect your intellectual property when you're developing and manufacturing products in Asia, probably with a bit of focus on China specifically as well, because everybody's heard about, the risks of being copied in China, and especially with the speed they can do it and the infrastructure that they have in cities like Shenzhen, for example. So I guess you're going to talk about China a little bit more, but this is good advice for most countries. So I mean, Vietnam, India, and wherever else you guys who are listening might be doing your manufacturing. This is a good one, right? So, and we often get asked this question by our customers as well, right?
Yeah, it's it's often one of the first questions. It's whenever they speak with someone who's based in Asia, they're always a bit guarded at the beginning, and they're like, well, I'm a bit worried about people copying, my product and da. So, how should I go about that and so on, right? And well, if it's on their mind, okay, fine, let's talk about it. But just amazing people who don't have much experience, like people who've been developing hardware products, working with Chinese, Vietnamese, Indian suppliers for 10 or 20 years. They don't tend to worry about this. They know where the risks are. They know how to mitigate it. They sort of have an idea about that. They accept part of the risk, and they might have a specific strategy to cope with it. But people who come to it for the first time, they're like, wow, they tend to be quite worried about it, and with a lot of misconceptions. So maybe we can waive some of these misconceptions today, hopefully.
Yeah, so what we should probably go through are some of your main tips, some of your main pieces of advice that everybody can consider when thinking about IP protection. This is something that we've written about before on Sofeast.com. There's actually a really good guide that we wrote, IP protection in China when developing your new product, and I will leave the link to that guide and loads of other stuff that we've spoken about and written about in the show notes to this episode. So just off the top of the episode, if this is something that you are concerned about, definitely check the show notes this time, because there's going to be a lot of extra reading and listening to do, right? But for today, let's just go through some of your major pieces of advice. So let's kick it off then.
The first thing is really don't be consumed by these thoughts, and don't just think, oh, it's China, so it's especially dangerous. Because a lot of the time, the people who are actually behind the initiative to copy your product are other companies in your country. They know, they see the market, they see your product, they like it, they get some samples, they bring it to or maybe they look for a new Chinese supplier, or but usually if they want to go fast, and cheap, they go to China, which is one of the reasons everybody thinks of China for IP protection. But it's not always Chinese people and Chinese companies that take the initiative. Sometimes it's USA company, German company, whatever, right? And they go to China because it's fast, especially if it's in electronics. It's going to be usually in Shenzhen, Dongguan, Huizhou, these kinds of places in the south. And they're going to send some samples and say, well, can you do something specific, like this, but maybe a bit different? Maybe change this into that and blah, blah, blah. And you put my logo on it, right? How to say? Very limited R&D expenditures here, right? Just look at it, reverse engineer it, try to see if you can find what components they use and so on. Hopefully there's not too much software to rewrite, and it's a lot of free R&D. and let's piggyback on it, and then let's get fast on the market, even if it's a bit of a crappy product. That's they have their own strategies, right? So sometimes
Yeah.
the initiative are really the people committing the theft, if I may say, or doing a little bit too much flattery by imitation.
Mm.
It's not Chinese people or Chinese companies, okay? And there's bad people like this everywhere. It's not just in China, okay?
No.
I mean, as we're recording this, I saw the news 1 or 2 days ago. The vice president of the EU Commission has been arrested in Belgium for corruption.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I saw that.
what about in the US, the FTX debacle? In the cryptocurrencies. When you look into this, it's just crazy. And then
Mm.
last month it was the lady from Theranos. That was just another humongous scandal. Okay,
Yeah.
so there are unethical people everywhere. Okay, you get
They reward them
um,
for that in the UK, by the way.
well, sometimes, but these days they talking about the UK, a lot of people did unethical things in the PPE craze in early
Oh,
2020, selling
yeah,
some pretty crappy masks and so on, doing false declaration and so on. And now it seems like the government is going to go after them and check them and suing
maybe,
some of them.
maybe.
It's
I'm not
happening a little
convinced.
bit,
We'll see.
happening a little bit already. So and yes, sometimes you really have the feeling that there's a lot of impunity. But anyway, uh,
Yeah,
my point is there's unethical people everywhere. Now, China has a little bit of their own culture around that, and they actually tend to say that if they imitate and do it in their own way and maybe simplify it, maybe improve it a little bit, maybe sometimes they add
mm.
1 or 2 features and they remove some others and so on. And in the West, we would say, well, this is a blatant copy, with some adjustments, but really they it's way too similar. And in China, there's a little bit of a cultural element that, hey, we actually helped improve the product. The whole Shanzai, they call it.
Mm.
So this there's a little bit of that going on in China, yes. And also in China, and especially in Shenzhen, there are companies that specialize in spotting the hot new products and making basically a copy, but usually a downgraded copy, a cheaper
Yep.
copy, less advanced and so on, but very fast, put
Mm.
it on the market, maybe half the price and yes, it's very painful, very, very painful for the companies that develop the product. Let's say the American startup that spent a lot of time thinking about it and so on.
Mm.
And then they have these guys in front of them at half the price, positioning themselves in social media and everywhere. So whenever someone searches for their brand name, they will also find these guys at half the
Mm.
price. I mean, it can really suck the wind out of their marketing campaign for sure. They're out of that
Sure.
lounge. So it's very, very painful. Okay. And it's true that we don't really see that, in India or in Eastern Europe or in Mexico and so on, right? So, but why is that, right? Because there's just so many, you know, small and medium manufacturing companies that are very entrepreneurial in China. So I don't
Mm.
see it as um, proof that Chinese companies are dishonest. Okay, now we can say that based on other proofs probably, but I would say not from that angle. Here, it's just that there's so many um, entrepreneurial, agile, if you want, companies that can do it, and then
Mm.
out of these thousands of companies, well, you're gonna have 5 or 10 or 20 that get to specialize in this kind of stuff. But it's just the
Mm.
same as the companies in the USA that specialize in making bogus parts for airplanes, right?
Yep.
And and this became such a problem in the 80s. I mean, they even found bogus parts on Air Force One. It gets
Mm.
so widespread everywhere in the industry, and of course, it caused some major accidents. It's been reported quite widely.
Mm.
That became a big problem, and then the regulators stepped in and so on. But again, let's not be specifically, hard on the Chinese here. It's just that's the way it is. But don't be insulted, based on that anyway. Versus Chinese people.
Well, I think as well, when you're putting a new product on the market, you've got to come to the realization and the acceptance that people are going to tear it down. And what happens when a product teardown goes too far and somebody thinks, well, this has got so many great ideas, I'm going to, utilize them all. And rather than having a flattering copy of your product, it almost ends up with a copycat product. And, it's going to happen, isn't it? You can't control that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good point. Good point. Exactly. And again, the initiative for copying, you might see a product that comes from China, but, who is really at the origin of the initiative? It's not always Chinese people. So
Yeah.
Another issue is that people tend to speak with lawyers, which is not a bad idea, of course, but they tend to, they tend to take what lawyers say, especially intellectual property lawyers, especially patent lawyers, at face value and say, okay, this is going to be such a differentiator. I'm going to put whatever, $50,000 into this, try to get a utility patent, otherwise, design patent, and then I'm going to register it in several countries, and I'm going to do also trademarks and so on and so forth. And you're digging a hole in your finances for a product that you don't even know will be successful or not. So, an idea without execution, even if it's brilliant, is worth nothing.
Yeah.
So first, you got to go through market research, proper market research, talking to people, showing them some mock-ups or something, getting some feedback. And you got to do it to refine your idea. And then maybe at one point you need to do a bit more quantitative, of a quantitative survey, and show some price points and so on. And you need to talk to people. You need to get some feedback, even show it to distributors and so on. Now, as long as you don't put it on a website like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, or even on YouTube, chances are slim that people will see it and want to copy you. Chances are quite slim. Now, if you do put it on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, and then you raise a lot of money, some Chinese companies are getting to work on it. You can bet on it. Okay. Earlier today, someone in the team showed me there's a cool, it's like a ring. They made sure it's not classed as a medical device. They don't say anything that can cause it to be classed as a medical device. But they say, just sort of track your biometrics, the heart rate and your sleep and this and this and that. And they called it ultra human. And they made a very, very cool video and so on, right? And they raised a bunch of money. And then immediately I say, well, there's 20 companies in Shenzhen that are making the same thing now, developing it. And I give them 3 months and they're going to start, shipping some of them, even if it's crappy, right?
Yep.
So, but these guys, Ultra Human, they've been working on it for about 2 years now. And if they do everything properly, step by step, maybe they got a final prototype, but that's it. They're still maybe getting some tooling made, and then they're going to do some proper PVT, DVT and PVT, like basically some pilot runs and so on before going into mass production. And then they're going to ship it, but probably by air. It's going to be fast with such a small product, but they might not even be the first to market, right? So if you do that, that's great for market research, but you are putting your the copycats to work immediately. So you need to be very, very careful with that. Now, maybe they're going to build their brand, and then people are just going to buy the ultra human one or whatever, and not the one that's half the price that pops up on AliExpress, Amazon, and so on, right? But it's probably going to, eat some of their market share for sure.
Oh yeah, it can be confusing.
So, oh yeah. Also,
Because you
yeah,
get all of
like
these similar products, and even if you want to buy the, let's say, original one, sometimes it's actually quite hard, especially when they're on a platform like Amazon.
yes, that's correct. Some people will get confused. Some people will ask, is it worth paying $250 or I can get this one for $100?
Yeah.
What's the difference, And some people are going to make YouTube videos to compare them, and actually they're going to say, well, this one, if you just need this and this, well, the cheap one is just as good, right? Because these YouTube reviewers, they have no idea if it's still going to be working in 6 months. They just check it right here, right now, and they get maybe they get sent a few nice samples that they review, and they don't know what the average quality is going to be like, and so on, right? So, and this will hurt the brand. So, market research is good. Crowdfunding, if you do it too early, you might not be the first to market. Now, if you do it when you've already got your tooling done and you're gearing up for mass production, and really you have eliminated most of the risks and you've done most of the financing of everything, yeah. But then do you still need to do crowdfunding? Maybe not, if you've already financed your tooling, right? So be quite careful with these sort of vanity websites where you say, oh yeah, I raised $300,000, look at that, and we got a big brand and a lot of distributors are going to contact us and everything. Yeah, but you get 10 companies or 20 companies in Shenzhen already building the same product. So,
right. So you've got to know when. You've got to know when to pull the trigger. And I guess that's difficult if you're less experienced of bringing new products to market. That's one of the difficult decisions to make, isn't it?
Absolutely. So again, if you do things in a smart way, which the first time you will probably not do, but if you listen to people who've been doing it a few times, they will tell you, this is the way to do customer development or whatever, some market research and like collecting data and like iterating based on the feedback and zeroing in on a certain demographic or interest or whatever, finding a way such as Facebook and things like that. Yeah, sorry, I hate Facebook, but sometimes it's a good medium for that.
Yeah.
And you test that, and you collect a lot of data and then you kind of put it in a market research report or something, and you show it to investors. Investors who know what they're doing, who know what it is to launch a successful hardware startup, will recognize a lot of value in that. It will show them that there's much less risk than most other startups at that stage of development. And then the great thing about that is that you can raise money from investors more easily, and hopefully you manage to do it, and you don't need to go through Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and so on. And by the way, people tend to overestimate the success rate, the real success rate, the success story of, I put $20,000 in to get the nice campaign set up, and I did not spend anything on advertisement, and I got $200,000 out of it. This is like 5% of the time, at best, it seems these days. So it get much harder to pull that off. Okay, it's really pay for play. You see people who raised $500,000, but maybe they put $150,000 in ads behind it. So and still they might consider it a success, right? If there's like, they have rules of thumb like this, like $1 in ads for maybe $4 in sales and so on. If you price it correctly, you can be doing okay. If you price too low, which is a very common mistake, you might go out of business with that. So, yeah, another big warning here. So, where was I going with this? You got to do market research in a smart way, without being too visible, if possible. And only when some people who are not in love with your product, not you, not your co-founders, not someone who just saw it, oh yeah, I love it. No. Several people who are not really passionate about it, just analyze it and have a lot of comparison points will tell you, well, here, yeah, it's really got high chances of success. You've really done a nice job. You've de-risked it as much as you could and so on. At that point, okay, talk to the lawyers, see how you can protect your IP, okay? But yeah, don't go for it first thing, because you might design and then you start to do design for manufacturing and you see you need to evolve it, and then you see that one of the components you picked went out of end of life, and then you need to change your design again, and so on and so forth. And then you're gonna apply for the patent again. So you're gonna pay again and again every time you do design changes. This is insane, right? But some people do it, and then they go out of business, very fast with this kind of bad decisions. This is really a risk. Now, people have a lot of questions about IP rights because they know that investors will ask questions about it. Now, investors will ask, okay, but what about in China? They will make it, maybe they can make it half the price. How do you prevent them from doing that? Like blah, blah, blah. Do you have protection for your IP? How can you, sort of build a fortress around your product? And again, investors who do not know this space might think it's very important. Now, they are not smart money. These guys will not provide you with good advice. Investors who know what it takes to launch a hardware startup successfully will ask you these questions, but they just want to see if you understand the risks and if you have a little bit of a plan around it. But if you say, well, we thought about it and we decided not to register a patent for this, whatever. Now we're working hard to get the final prototype ready without burning too much money. And we're working at the same time on market research this way and that way. And my plan to avoid getting copied is to avoid going crowdfunding. This is why I'm approaching you now, so that we can finance the tooling and mass production and yada, yada, yada. Well, if you get a good plan and good explanations, the discerning and experienced and relevant investor will say, great, these guys are, these guys are a strong founding team. They know what they're doing. And this project already has a lot less risk than other projects in the same stage of development. So investors ask questions and friends and family and advisors ask questions, but it doesn't mean, and they might say, do you have a patent or whatever? If they don't have all the experience, of pulling out this kind of venture, do not listen to them. They are just asking if you have a plan to avoid falling victim to copycats. They are not actually asking for registration of patents. Now, trademarks are another issue. It's much cheaper and it does help, especially in your country. Yeah, try to think of a nice name that people can remember, etc., and try to register a trademark. You might also want to do it in China, or maybe you wait until the first signs of success and then right away you snap it. That makes more sense than a patent. Okay, so that's a huge misconception that that really plagues a lot of people's decision-making process. Another piece of advice, some people want to create a category, and they say, well, my product does this, and they think it's smart to give it a category name, and maybe they make it part of their product name. Do not do that. If a copycat in Shenzhen wants to go after you and wants to be found when people search for your product name, then they will put the same sort of category name in their product name. Now, definitely do not do that. I'm not sure if actually, there's one example. It was a nice, smart accessory for cameras. Okay, they called it rapid filtering system. So you could set it up on the opening of the camera, and then you could like opening or close it very, very fast to add a filter or remove the filter. And then they called it RFS, rapid filtering system. And then they had their brand name, and then after the brand name they had RFS, and then they had a copycat from Shenzhen sell their own RFS product. Right? Too bad. And then people searching in Google, YouTube, and so on, RFS, then they all found the comparisons. Because these copycats in Shenzhen, the ones that are most savvy about it, they will send some samples to some YouTubers or bloggers. They will pay them even a little bit to get mentioned. They send some free samples, maybe they pay a bit, and then they get mentioned, brand A versus brand B comparison, and then whenever you do a Google search for brand A, then you found these blog posts and these YouTube videos. Boom, and that's how they steal a lot of your market share, and that's how they create confusion, as you were mentioning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and in that case, the similar product, shall we say, was a lot cheaper, right? So people were seeing it a lot more. Right. It had a lot more hype and a lot more buzz, and it was cheaper. So people were they just didn't buy the product.
Right. And the American company went out of business because of that. In very good part, for the most part. Yeah. Now you there's some basics you need to do, right? Discuss your product idea with somebody, you get them to sign the proper agreement. And if, it's not just about non-disclosure, it's also about non-use, non-circumvention, meaning that they should not use the idea themselves to do anything with it. And they should not, and then if it's for a potential supplier, non-circumvention, like they might learn who your customers are, for example. So they should not go around you. Right, circumvent you. So this is not just about China, and in an agreement, and we covered it in a previous podcast.
Yes.
This is a basic, and if it's in China, you got to make sure it's the proper template, for enforcement in China, right? If it's Hong Kong company, Singapore company, and so on. Common English common law system, as long as their country enforces the judgments in your country. Well, I'm not a lawyer, okay, so this is not advice.
Yeah,
but it's probably still fine. You might actually mention, okay, you're in Hong Kong, then we do it with litigation in Hong Kong. So if they do something, you can quickly go to court in their country. And then enforcement will tend, it'll be easier to have swift enforcement, let's say, okay, rather than in another country and then try to get their country to enforce the judgment from another country and everything. Then, of course, it's a little bit more complicated right away, right? And in China, you really want it to be enforced in China, especially if you're an American company, because Chinese courts do not enforce the judgment from USA courts, at least for the most part, from what I understand. So you got to pay attention to that. Again, not a bad idea to talk to lawyers. So this is a basic. And then when you talk to a supplier, you get to have a product development agreement. And this also, we mentioned it, and we went through that in a previous podcast episode.
Yeah.
But who is going to pay for what? What are the milestones going to be? What are the validation and verification steps that will be required? Who's going to pay for the tooling? Will you have all the latest files in native format, like right away after their engineers do any kind of work? Or, are you going to finance everything, or are they going to finance a part of it? And then
Mm.
what do they get out of it? So basically, this comes back to what we call the Western approach versus Chinese approach. So in the West, maybe you go to a design house and you just pay them for the design, and you go to a contract manufacturer and then you say, okay, this is the design, this and this. Okay, maybe we need to pay you a bit to do some of the validation and some of the design for manufacturing adjustments and so on. But you do the work, you don't own anything, and then we can change. We can go to another contract manufacturer anytime, right? As long as we pay you for the work you do. Okay, this is the Western approach, and this is how we work with our clients. Now, in China, if you don't discuss this, then by default it will be the Chinese model, even if you deal with Western companies. So they will not bill you at the beginning for some of the work they do, or maybe they bill you for some of it, but not all. But then at one point you will ask some questions and you will see that you cannot get an answer, right? Just this morning in email, a client has some issues with silicon product. I cannot be specific, but they put it on the market, and then they found that it's got some reliability issues. Then they ask us to look at the design and okay, where do these problems come from? And then we say, okay, well, send us the design file. So they got the design files. Okay, not too bad. At least they have that, and they sent it to us. And then we say, okay, and what's the silicon that they use? Was the specifications of the silicon, or what silicon was used? And then the supplier told our client, oh, sorry, I cannot give you that information. Why not? Well, that's the way it works here. Why?
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't tell you this information. And basically, I think it's even worse than that. I think she's working with a trading company that is buying things from a Chinese manufacturer that would not even tell the trading company, what silicon it is. So she would never get that information. But if she worked directly with the Chinese manufacturer, it would be the same. They would say, no, sorry, it's like a business secret.
Yeah.
Right? It's your product, sort of. Sort of.
Until it isn't.
So we won't tell you.
Yeah.
Right? And it raises all kinds of questions about compliance and so on. I mean, it's not just about intellectual property. Right? So that's the Chinese model. You need to clarify this. Where I was going with that is, you get to ask the right questions and say, okay, this is the way I want to work, and make sure it's clear, black and white, in an agreement that is signed by the supplier, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, ouch, high risks, high risks.
And if they won't, that's a major red flag, because you're opening yourself up to problems in the future. But maybe a lot of importers might blindly sort of go into it and just be like, oh, yeah, well, okay, everything's sort of going along well at the moment. Yeah, until it isn't. And you get a scenario like with the silicon that you've just mentioned. Can I just jump in for a second here as well and mention, with regards to the agreements as well, I think this is becoming even more important these days with the regulations that are coming in regarding supply chain transparency.
Yes, of course. Supply chain transparency so far is mostly a requirements that came up in various European countries, and now there's some regulations coming out of the EU Commission soon. Okay, it's been announced. And yes, you need to have some information about your supply chain. In the USA, you get something about the forced labor in a certain province of Western China, right? So they are going after that. And in the
mm,
US, it's already in place, and the US Customs and Border Protection Agency has already blocked a lot of containers because they don't have the proper pieces of evidence that some of the components were not produced with labor, with forced
mm,
labor from that Western province. That is so far, the only objective.
mm,
So it's a huge problem if you are in photovoltaic solar panels. It's becoming a big problem in garments or any textile products made of cotton.
yep,
Some food products also with like dried tomatoes and so on. And
yes,
these days, I think a professor there's been some research in a university showing that actually a lot of the car models have parts that may have been made with forced labor in that context,
mm,
and that's opening a huge can of worms. So no idea where
yep.
this is going. Yeah, right. So it depends.
But this is like a different, this is like a slightly different topic, but it just
Mhm.
feeds into the importance of having those agreements where everything's in black and white, and you know that your supplier is going to give you that information if you need it.
Right. I mean, if not, generally, it's not if you need it. Is you request it and they give it to you right away before they change
Yes,
their mind.
yes,
Um, uh, yeah, are you gonna get a minimalist bill of material, which is just a list of the components without any further details, or are you gonna get visibility over the full bill of materials? Um,
mm,
Basically, the information that their purchasers work with, so that you can actually
mm,
identify who are the tier two suppliers. And few by default, the Chinese model will completely hide that away from you, right?
oh
So
yeah,
if it's quite important for you, if you've identified one or two critical components, then maybe you can request that they buy these components from these suppliers, and then at least you know these ones. But
mm,
how about all the others, right? And really, I would argue, um, if you want to own your product and you want to be able to have it manufactured anywhere and so on, you've got to have this information, because sometimes one
mm,
of the components is so critical. Or maybe you want the exact same surface finish, or something like that. And if you
mm,
don't know where that's done, well, you're sort of stuck with your supplier. If you're stuck with your supplier, let me ask you,
mm,
do you feel like it's your product? You
mm.
know, you're forced to manufacture it in that place. Without these guys, you will not be able to get to the same result anymore. Well, is it your product? you
Yeah,
you it's your product, but the supplier has some rights on it. Let's say it this way. So this goes
mm,
back to transparency and so on. It's another kind of issue that comes from the same mistake of not signing the proper agreements at the right time. Yes.
yeah. We diverge a little bit from protecting intellectual property to protecting your business interests, basically. But the two are obviously very, very linked. And
Right.
yeah, it's like if you have an issue with that supplier, well, can you pick up and say, okay, well, guys, we're going to move on and we're going to go and start working with supplier B now? And the answer is
Mm.
no. So
Right.
you're kind of like
Exactly.
trapped. Are you at their
Hmm.
mercy? Are they
Hmm.
going to raise prices? Can you do anything about that? So this is like essential admin, isn't it?
Plus, it can lead to intellectual property issues, because the
Yeah,
supplier, if they feel they're in a position of strength, well, they might actually make and sell some of your products, through the back door in other supply chains, and hope that you
indeed.
never notice. Or maybe they will say, well, we have no idea. It's another company that copied it.
Hmm.
Right? So you don't want them to feel like they have any rights over the product, basically.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So these are a few topics that we wanted to cover today, and there's going to be a lot more reading in the links that Adrian will include in the show notes, right?
Yes, I will indeed. A very entertaining episode and a very important topic. I like it. Very helpful. So once again, please check the show notes, guys, and there'll be plenty of videos and written content and some of our earlier podcast episodes there as well on this topic. If you do have questions about things like product development agreements and protecting IP in general, please feel free to reach out and ask us. We can offer some assistance with these matters, but as Renaud says, we're not lawyers, so it is always ultimately good to speak to a lawyer who has experience with enforceable contracts in China or India or wherever it is that you're manufacturing to.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's wrap it up, Renaud. Thanks to you, and thanks to everybody for listening again. We're accelerating quickly towards Christmas now, but we'll still have some more episodes coming towards the end of this year and then into January as well.
So, to the listeners, how to say politically correct is happy holidays, right?
No, that's absolutely true. Happy holidays. And we'll probably be back around the Christmas period anyway and the New Year period. So just look out for those podcasts popping up on wherever you get your podcasts from. Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.